So then a private company took pity on San Francisco and offered to build them their toilet for free. But after, quote, project management, construction management, architecture and engineering fees, permits, civic design review, surveys, contract preparation, and cost estimation, the free toilet was still going to cost almost $1 million. You know, if you tack on fees like that, you're not a city, you're an airline. It's no wonder that in 2021, San Francisco issued only 2,000 permits for new homes. Sure, there are people living in the streets, but that's because we want to make sure the apartments they don't live in are perfect. I don't fear AI anymore because it couldn't possibly be any more robotic than the humans who run things now.
Picture this for a moment. Your city is literally on fire, neighborhoods are threatened. Smoke is everywhere, and the official emergency plan feels like it boils down to one simple hope. Maybe it'll rain. That's a reality many people feel they're living in right now, and it's exactly why Bill Maher's latest rant about California has struck such a nerve. He isn't doing the usual partisan routine or trading cheap jokes. Instead, he goes straight after something most people don't think about until it completely upends their lives, a massive, bloated bureaucracy that turns even urgent life-or-death problems into slow-moving chaos. Everything becomes harder than it needs to be, more expensive than it should be, and painfully delayed when speed matters most. Maher opens with a point that sounds obvious but hits hard once you really think about it. We can't control the weather. No one can stop the wind, the heat, or a drought. Climate patterns matter, and yes, climate change makes fire seasons more intense. But that reality has become a convenient excuse, a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card for bad governance. You may not be able to control the wind, but you absolutely can control whether forests are managed properly, whether brush is cleared, whether water systems work, whether hydrants are pressure, whether evacuation plans are ready, and whether emergency teams can actually move fast when disaster strikes. Those things are choices, not acts of nature. This is where Maher's criticism really sharpens. He argues that many of these systems aren't designed to respond quickly or protect residents. They are designed to protect themselves. Layer upon layer of process slows everything down. Decisions get bounced between departments. Responsibility gets diluted. Urgency disappears. By the time action is approved, the damage is already done. It's not about left versus right, Democrats versus Republicans, or some cartoon villain. Maher isn't pushing a conspiracy theory or railing against an imaginary enemy. Instead, he points to what he describes as a permanent class of process-driven insiders. Regulators, administrators, inspectors, reviewers, consultants, zoning officials, special commissioners, and project managers. People whose roles, intentionally or not, end up centered on making sure nothing moves too fast and nothing changes without endless review. The result is a system where delay is normal, action is risky, and failure carries no real consequences. And somehow, the public still gets the bill. That's why this conversation hits such a nerve. You're either going to nod along because you've seen this play out in your own city, or you're going to be furious because it feels uncomfortably true. Either way, Maher is forcing people to confront a hard question. When everything is urgent, why does government move like nothing is? And maybe an even harder one follows. What's $1 million toilet, the endless permit nightmare, or the absurd bureaucratic failure in your own town that proves the system is broken?
But there is a deep state, which is the bureaucratic class that justifies its existence by making up new rules, and that's my job. It's the vast network of regulators, administrators, inspectors, contract reviewers, project managers, fee assessors, special commissioners, zoning officers, and consultants whose jobs seem to be to make sure nothing ever happens and then charge you for it.
Before anyone jumps in with, "Oh, so you want no rules at all," Maher makes it clear that's not what he's saying. Rules matter. Safety matters. Accountability matters. Nobody is arguing that we should build power plants out of toothpicks and good intentions. The real problem, he says, starts when the rulebook turns into a kind of religion, when the goal is no longer asking, does this actually help real people? And instead becomes, did we follow every step perfectly? At that point, process replaces purpose. The system stops caring about outcomes and starts caring only about whether every box was checked, every form was filed, and every ritual was completed exactly the right way. This is where Maher connect the issue to long-term one-party dominance. Not because one party is evil or corrupt by nature, but because competition is what keeps any system healthy. Without it, things get lazy. He uses a simple comparison almost everyone understands. Think about a restaurant that's the only one in town. At first, it's great. Then, over time, the fries get cold, the service slows down, and eventually even the bathrooms aren't clean the way they should be. Why? Because there's no pressure to improve. When customers have nowhere else to go, the business only has to exist, not excel. In Maher's telling, California's political environment has reached that same point. Party loyalty has replaced performance. People defend their side even when basic governance is clearly failing. When disaster strikes, the response becomes tribal and reflexive. Don't blame politicians, people say. What could they possibly do? It sounds reasonable until you remember that politicians control budgets, staffing, priorities, agencies, infrastructure planning, and emergency preparedness. Saying what could they do makes about as much sense as hiring a plumber who shows up 2 weeks late while your house is flooding and then shrugging and paying him again because, well, you can't control water. At some point, accountability has to matter. That's why the example Maher uses next hits so hard. You can talk about bureaucracy in abstract terms all day, and most people's eyes will glaze over. It feels distant and theoretical. But the moment you say that building a single public toilet can cost over $1 million, everyone snaps to attention. Suddenly, the problem isn't abstract anymore. It's concrete, absurd, and impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why Maher brings it up. It turns a vague complaint about too much bureaucracy into a clear, undeniable symbol of a system that has lost its grip on common sense.
In San Francisco, the city's so nice you'll step in poop twice. There's an area where homeless people were urinating and defecating, and it was starting to annoy the people breaking into cars. So the city tried to build a public toilet last year, but then gave up when the cost hit $1.7 million. Not $1.7 million for a public toilet system. $1.7 million for one toilet. And this wasn't some magic toilet that catches your phone when you drop it.
According to the example Maher pointed to, San Francisco set out to build a single public toilet, and the projected cost ballooned to around $1.7 million. Not a full restroom complex. Not a row of facilities. One toilet. And the joke Maher makes about it lands because it's uncomfortably close to the truth. At that price, you'd expect it to come with Wi-Fi, a meditation space, and maybe a personal attendant offering a warm towel like you're at a luxury hotel. But no, it's just a basic toilet. What makes it even more absurd is a reality San Francisco is dealing with on the streets. Human waste, overflowing trash, open drug use, and serious sanitation problems are daily issues. You would think something as basic as public bathrooms will be treated like an urgent public health need. Instead, Maher argues it gets handled like a boutique art project. Endless community meetings, design committees, consultants, and layers of approval slow everything to a crawl. The dark humor comes from how far the process drifts from common sense. What should be a straightforward fix turns into months or years of reviews, reports, and debates. Maher paints it as a system more concerned with procedure than results, where a simple toilet needs countless rounds of input and massive studies before anyone is allowed to pour concrete. In the meantime, the problem everyone can see on the streets remains exactly where it started, untouched and unresolved.
So then a private company took pity on San Francisco and offered to build them their toilet for free. But after, quote, project management, construction management, architecture and engineering fees, permits, civic design review, surveys, contract preparation, and cost estimation, the free toilet was still going to cost almost $1 million. You know, if you tack on fees like that, you're not a city, you're an airline.
Maher's deeper point is that bureaucracy doesn't just waste money, it actively blocks solutions. Even when a private company steps in and offers to build something for free, it somehow still isn't free. Why? because that free project still has to crawl through an endless swamp of fees and procedures. Project management fees, construction oversight fees, architecture and engineering costs, permits, surveys, civic design reviews, contract preparation, cost estimates, and more. By the time all of that is added up, the free toilet starts to look like one of those free trials that quietly auto-renews into a lifetime subscription you can't escape. That's where Maher delivers one of his sharpest lines. He jokes that if you pile on fees like that, you're not running a city anymore, you're running an airline. The comparison lands instantly because everyone gets it. You buy a flight advertised at $79, and by the time you're done checking out, you paid $300 because you wanted to bring a bag, choose a seat, exist comfortably, and maybe breathe. Every basic need becomes an add-on. In Maher's view, that's exactly how San Francisco governance works. Nothing is simple. Everything comes with extra charges, extra steps, and extra delays. And this is where it stops being just a funny toilet story. Maher makes it clear this is a pattern, not a one-off mistake. He points to housing approvals as another glaring example. In San Francisco, the median time to get approval to build housing is reportedly 627 days. That's not a short delay or minor inconvenience. That's nearly 2 years of your life gone while paperwork bounces from one desk to another, and someone reviews someone else's review of a previous review. Then comes a comparison that really stings. Maher notes that this approval process takes longer than it took to build the Empire State Building. Let that sink in. One of the greatest engineering achievements in history was completed faster than it now takes to get permission to build housing in one of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced cities on Earth. In Maher's telling, that's not progress. It's proof that a system obsessed with process has completely lost touch with urgency, common sense, and results.
It feels like San Francisco is actually proud of being impossible. Asked about the toilet, a spokesman for the Department of Public Works said, "We are a city of public input." Okay, but I'm stepping in public output. Meanwhile, the median time to get approval to build a house there is 627 days. That's 217 days longer than it took to build the Empire State Building. You need 87 permits, 15 from the Planning Commission, 26 from the Public Utilities Commission and the Fire Department, 19 from building inspectors, 17 from the Public Works, 10 related to public spaces, and 1 from a guy in a t-shirt that says Federal Boob Inspector.
So what actually changed? Maher argues it's not that people suddenly got less capable or less intelligent. It's that the system got slower. Process took over. Paperwork became a kind of moral shield, a way to prove virtue without delivering results. Over time, the focus shifted from solving problems to avoiding blame at all costs. And once that happens, no one is rewarded for standing up and saying, "This is ridiculous." In fact, the ridiculousness becomes a system. That's where the jobs are. That's where the power sits. Maher jokes about the endless list of permits, saying you need approval from every department imaginable, including a fake federal inspector just to drive the point home. It's funny, but it also reveals something uncomfortable. When people hear that a simple project can require 87 permits, the natural reaction is disbelief. At some point, you have to ask whether the system actually wants anything to get built at all. Complexity stops being about safety and starts acting like sabotage. This connects directly to California's housing crisis. San Francisco, a city with a population well over 800,000, faces a massive housing shortage, tens of thousands of homes behind where it needs to be. Yet it approves only around 2,000 housing permits a year. Even if the exact numbers vary depending on the source, the lived reality is obvious to anyone who has spent time there. Housing supply is choked off, demand is relentless, and prices are crushing. In Maher's view, this isn't a mystery or an accident. It's a predictable outcome of a system that values process over progress and paperwork over people.
It's no wonder that in 2021, San Francisco issued only 2,000 permits for new homes. Sure, there are people living in the streets, but that's because we want to make sure the apartments they don't live in are perfect. I don't fear AI anymore because it couldn't possibly be any more robotic than the humans who run things now.
Here's the part that always lands with that dark, uncomfortable laugh. Politicians hold press conferences wringing their hands about affordability, then turn around and defend systems that make building housing feel like trying to summon a demon using nothing but legal forms and a blood oath. It's like watching someone complain they're thirsty while duct taping the faucet shut. And when housing doesn't get built, it's not some abstract policy failure. People don't just have fewer choices. They get pushed out, rent spike, families double up, people end up living in cars. Homelessness grows. Then the same government that made housing nearly impossible pivots into crisis management mode, pouring massive amounts of money into temporary fixes that treat the symptoms while the disease keeps spreading. That's why Maher's line cuts so deep. Sure, there are people living on the streets, but that's because we want to make sure the apartments they don't live in are perfect. It's a punchline, but it's also an indictment. Perfection becomes the excuse for paralysis. Paralysis becomes the excuse for suffering. And then there's Gavin Newsom. This is where Maher gets messy in a way that's actually interesting. He doesn't do the lazy thing where every Democrat is reduced to a cartoon villain. He gives Newsom real credit. He praises his talent, his looks, his speaking ability, his sharpness, and his command of a room. In Maher's telling, Newsom as a candidate is formidable. But then comes a turn. The ideology, the baggage, the fact that even a skilled, charismatic leader can end up trapped by the system and the brand he represents. And that's a tension Maher keeps coming back to. If you have the talent, the platform, and the power, but you're still presiding over paralysis, at some point the question isn't about intentions anymore. It's about results.
But you also have faith in California Governor Gavin Newsom, did you not?
I love him as a candidate. Yes, I mean you're right. He's not exactly what I'm describing now.
Right.
I think he'd be a great candidate. He has shown in recent months the ability also to move to the center. He would have to do it a lot more. Mm-hmm. But as a candidate, he looks great. Great speaker, very forceful, can be mean, which is really important, mm-hmm. and he can do it. He also has the backing, or certainly should, of where the energy is in the Democratic Party, the far left, because, he's been out front on a lot of very liberal issues, which I think is great. Gay marriage here in California and stuff like that, pollution, all sorts of stuff that we believe in.
In Maher's view, Gavin Newsom has tied himself too closely to the far left cultural brand. Not necessarily because he personally believes every extreme version of it, but because he's been out front on so many culture war issues that has become a symbol. And in national politics, symbols are dangerous. Once voters lock an identity onto a candidate, they stop listening for nuance. They don't hear explanations or context anymore. They just react to the label. That's why Maher argues Newsom would need to move much more clearly toward the center if he wants to be viable on a national stage. He's made a few gestures in that direction already, but Maher believes it wouldn't be enough. And whether you like Newsom or can't stand him, it's a fair political question. Can someone so closely associated with California's most polarizing cultural debates win swing states where voters are focused on groceries, gas prices, schools, and public safety, not online culture wars? The conversation then widens to a broader issue, often framed through figures like AOC. Can a far-left candidate realistically win a general presidential election today? Maher's answer is no. You don't have to agree with him to understand his reasoning. His argument is that national elections are decided in the middle, not on the edges. Voters who swing elections tend to care less about ideological purity and more about practical outcomes. In that environment, candidates closely tied to extreme positions may excite a base, but they struggle to build the broad coalition needed to actually win.
But, he does have a long trail to lose the baggage of governor of the most liberal state in the country. I tell him face to face, I've said it on the show, he went too far left for me often. But it is encouraging to see that in at least 3 places I can think of, he has moved it back to the center. But he's got a long way to go if he wants to do that.
Do you think a far lefty can win a national election in this day and age? A presidential election. Do you think that could happen?
Far left, you mean like AOC?
Yes. I'm just whether it's what you said about Newsom, whether it's an AOC. I mean, do you think somebody like that can win a general election for the presidency of the United States in this day and age? I don't think so.
National elections aren't purity contests. They are coalition-building competitions. They're about persuading people who don't already agree with you. If your entire strategy is my side is morally superior, congratulations, you just lost Ohio. But beneath all the electoral politics, Maher's argument is actually sharper than move to the middle. What he's really saying is, govern like results matter. You can be left, right, center, or politically upside down. None of that matters if your government can't do basic tasks at a basic speed for a basic cost. And that's where the fires come back into the picture. When Maher talks about wildfires and response failures, things like hydrant systems, water pressure, and coordination, he's not denying complexity. He's calling it out. Fine, he's basically saying, it's complicated. That's why you're paid. That's why the state collects massive tax revenue. That's why agencies exist. Complexity isn't an excuse. It's a job description. If someone tells you, putting water in hydrants is complicated, the only sane response is, okay, so why wasn't it handled? Because in a crisis, nobody cares how elegant your explanation is. They care whether the system works when it's needed most. And this is what makes Maher's warning bigger than California. This model doesn't scale. You can't export process worship to the rest of the country and expect people to tolerate it. People will forgive a lot. They'll forgive mistakes, bad luck, and even bad optics. What they won't forgive is a government that takes their money, lectures them about virtue, and then fails to deliver the basics. That's a real disconnect Maher's pointing at. Not ideology, not party labels, but competence. And once voters decide a system can't do the fundamentals, no amount of messaging can save it.
We may not be able to do much about the weather, but we do need a better plan for putting out a burning city than waiting for rain. America is so partisan now that even when there's a disaster of any kind, so many people choose to defend their own team, even over death. A lot of Democrats in this one-party state this week went right to, don't blame politicians, you can't do anything about the wind. Which is exactly half true. The wind part. Yes, fire is a tough fight out here, and yes, global warming absolutely makes it worse. But that's largely out of our control. What are we going to do? Pass a ballot measure to make sure Chinese stop burning coal?
Exactly. When you stitch it all together, the picture gets uncomfortably clear. $1 million toilets, 2-year housing approvals, permit explosions, a homelessness crisis fueled by a housing chokehold, disaster response system so tangled in process that they trip over themselves when speed actually matters. Taken individually, each problem can be dismissed as a fluke, a trade-off, or just how complex modern governance is. But together, they form a pattern, and patterns don't come from bad luck. That's where Maher's thesis really lands. This isn't accidental. It's self-inflicted. It's a system that rewards paperwork over performance, optics over outcomes, and loyalty over accountability. Success is measured by whether the correct boxes were checked, not whether the problem was actually solved. And once that mindset takes over, dysfunction becomes stable. It sustains jobs, budgets, committees, and careers, even as real-world results get worse. And the tragic irony is this. You can love California and still say all of this out loud. In fact, the people who love California the most should be the angriest about it. Because California is supposed to be the showcase. It has the money, the talent, the universities, the tech sector, agriculture, entertainment, coastline, culture, everything. It should be unstoppable. Instead, it struggles to do the basics. It treats a public toilet like a space shuttle launch, a housing project like a moral tribunal, an emergency response like a paperwork exercise. That gap between potential and performance is the real scandal. Not ideology, not partisanship, waste. Maher's critique isn't California bad. It's California could be great if it stopped tying its own hands. And until that changes, no amount of messaging, branding, or virtue signaling will fix what is fundamentally a system problem hiding behind good intentions.
Axios ran a story on how getting the water out of the hydrants in Pacific Palisades was more complicated than it seems. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's very complicated. That's why I pay 13% of my income in this state every year to people who I assumed were working on things like this.
So let me throw it back to you. If your city government had to install one public toilet, how much do you honestly think it would cost? And how long would it take? A month? A year? Or would your grandkids be cutting the ribbon at the grand opening? Because that's the real question here. Not who's right wing or left wing, but do you want a government that actually works? One that can build, respond, fix, and adapt without drowning in its own rulebook. Mayor's closing message, whether you like his tone or not, really comes down to this. Reform the system. Add competition. Demand results. Stop rewarding performance art, or accept that the same failures will repeat forever, just with new slogans. So yeah, argue about Newsom. Argue about Democrats. Argue about the culture war. But don't miss the bigger monster hiding in plain sight, the bureaucracy that eats solutions alive. Now I want to hear from you. What's the most ridiculous government efficiency story you've seen firsthand? The permit that took a year. The project cost 10 times what it should have. The construction site that never, ever ended. Drop it in the comments, because I guarantee we'll see the same theme over and over. Good idea. Endless process. Insane cost. Nothing gets done. And if you made it this far, do the algorithm thing. Like the video, subscribe, and share it with that friend who still thinks it's complicated is a valid excuse for everything. Because sometimes the truth is simpler. It's not complicated. It's broken.